Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao of Pizza podcast, where I talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. I have Dr. Jeremy Weiss here of Rise 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. And we flipped the script today, and he'll be interviewing me. Jeremy?
Mark, I'm excited because, you're like a philosopher at heart. Okay. And I get to hear your business philosophy and how you not just, you really are holistic as far as family and health and business all kind of wrapped into one. So we're going to dig into some of the archetypes and how you think about that and how that integrates into your business, specifically the integral speech of the lens of the messenger. But before we dig into that, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. And, I know you've been in the logistics and storage industry for several decades, and you provide industry-leading warehouse storage solutions nationwide. And so basically what that means for the layperson is if you have a warehouse, you need all the stuff that fills the warehouse. You need racks, you need shelving, you need carts, you need conveyors, you need mezzanines, you help with the design and engineering and installations and inspections and repairs and anything surrounding that, right? You are kind of the go-to person and really the strategist for a lot of these things. And you take a holistic approach of that entire business and supply chain and ecosystem to help people develop that operation. And so if you have questions, you can go to specialracks.com. They've been doing it for decades and decades, or call them at 707-732-3892. I know Mark gives away his personal email address for podcast listeners. So you can actually email him at markhiddleson@aol.com, and you can check that out. So Mark, walk me through, we're going to talk about the integral speech through the lens of the messenger, but talk a little bit about kind of where we've come for a second before we go into this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. So we've done two other recordings. We did one, which was the integral worldview through the lens of the clown archetype. And just to do a quick explanation, the chapters are set up in a specific order where each chapter sort of creates the container for the next chapter. So, for example, your worldview creates what's possible for you. What's the container for what's possible in your life? And we looked at that through the lens of the clown archetypes. Now, the archetypes is an exercise that I've gone through to just sort of identify with the patterns that I've personally chosen. I did a project on how to do that and, why I selected certain archetypes. And it's interesting because the chapters are in order on purpose, but the archetypes had a very scientific way of matching the archetypes up with the chapters. Is I wrote them all down, put them in a hat, and then I drew them out one by one.
Very scientific.
So it was scientific because I kept track of it. It was a system. But what's funny to me is the way they lined up, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it makes sense. So the worldview for me. I chose the clown archetype because I like that. We talked about, and it's integral because we talked about the shadow aspects, that being a clown, everything's not a joke. And so, for me, for the clown archetype, I had to learn, when some things I say aren't really funny and being honest about myself. And when those things happen and going back and making amends, but comedy and looking at your life. I mean, the questions for the clown worldview is, can you use comedy to not take yourself so seriously? Because that's something I've done is that, everything's so important, business is so important, winning a game is so important. So I've used comedy for that to not take myself seriously. And then we also talk about using comedy to challenge the status quo, right? The court jester was always be able to say things to the king because it was a joke. And so we could talk about things that were kind of uncomfortable. And so we talked about that, integrating the shadow. And then the other one was the Don Juan, the integral mission and vision. So really your worldview, what you think is possible, creates, what the vision of what you could see you could possibly accomplish in your life. And the Don Juan is another one of those archetypes that I selected because it's I've been in sales my whole life, so there's a lot of, the Don Juan is the wooing. But most people think of it from a romantic sense of, the Don Juan is always trying to woo somebody from the other sex. And but it also, all of the archetypes, they come into play, but it's in the Don Juan, the noble side of the Don Juan is that you're using your energy and commitment to the practice of getting what you really want out of life. But and I always think in literature, I think Don Juan is really romanticized in movies. And at least for me, I always kind of admired that role of the suitor. But there's a shadow side of Don Juan, and that is, the inauthenticity of saying things that is going to flatter somebody because you want them to like you want them to do certain things. And with training, you can get really skilled at it. And then if you use it for the wrong reasons to manipulate people, and you're not really committed to the practice of serving others, that's sort of the shadow side of the Don Juan. And there's a funny story. Can I share a funny story about that?
This is your show. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, one of my really good coach, business collaborator, good friends shared with me a song that reminded him of me. And it's a country song. So I was kind of, what is this? It's a country song. They play a lot on popular. I know, but it's and I'm already busted. You're the one, but it's, you make me want to roll my windows down and cruise.
Yeah, and, Cruise is the song.
Yeah, Cruise, and I was like, why that song? But I was flattered. It felt good. It's like, well, having a song, it makes the connection a little closer, and because we have a real good relationship. I really. That
would be your theme song if you're like walking up to the plate batting or something. and the funny thing is, Mark, about that, when I sent that to you and I'm like, this song reminds me of you, it wasn't because of the Don Juan. I honestly didn't even listen closely to the lyrics, and I had never really watched the video. So when I sent you that YouTube video link, I had never watched the YouTube video. I've only heard the song. Yeah. And I didn't even realize what it was about. It was just like an upbeat, like you're kind of like an upbeat type of person, optimistic. And that's why I was. But then I watched it, and I think your wife may have been CC'd on that email. I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant. I was like, backtracking. Yeah. I'm like, that's not what I meant, I swear. But then I watched the video. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that's what the song was about. Well, I didn't listen close enough to the lyrics, I guess.
And so the Don Juan part of it is that it's just doing something, you're sharing what you're doing. You're sharing, there's an intimacy there, right? Like we have something. So that's a Don Juan. It's like, we have something together here. And I know you're being sincere. And the funny thing is, I know you're sincere because if I find out you're not sincere, I'm going to meet at McDonald's and kick your rear. We know that. But it's a great example of being authentic. It's building relationships, which to me, the most important thing in life for me, it's always been about relationships. And to me, that was just a great example of using the healthy aspect of the Don Juan. I mean, if you see something and something reminds you of somebody, and it share it with them. So I appreciated it. It was, and then I shared a song. I was like, well, man, what song reminds me of Jeremy? And so I sent you a link the other day, right? And it was Whip It from Devo. So
I didn't know how to take that.
Yeah, well, shake it up, whip it up into shape. Shape it up.
So people should check out Florida Georgia Line Cruise and let us know if that reminds you of Mark, if you do know him or not.
And it reminded me, the cruise thing, it reminded me of a poem that I wrote while I was working on the book, and it's called Cultivating the Creative Force of Chill. And I didn't know if I'll have the guts to do this or anything right now, but I do. I actually kind of want to, because you were really speaking to this, I'll read this poem, and I'm dedicating it to you for this episode only. But I wrote this poem just trying to figure out like why I was writing this book. Where am I at? What are the important things? And I think it's perfect with the integral speech and the messenger. So that's the other thing. It was just random that speech and messenger ended up the same chapter, because again, I drew it out of the hat. This is the third thing I drew out of the hat. This is the third chapter. But speech,
and it's the messenger is who you pulled out of the hat.
Messenger.
Archetype, the messenger.
The messenger I pulled out of the hat. And so speech is really how we, deliver our message. And there's, speech is important. It's the First Amendment, the Constitution, the freedom of speech. And it's just such a powerful way for us to connect. And it's not just words. It's poetry, it's music, messages are verbal, nonverbal, but I really love poetry. And I'm reading this poem. I'm not asking you for your permission to read this poem. I want to read it, but cultivate the creative force of chill. When you discover who you truly are, it's time to drive that fancy car. Put your foot to the floor, free from worry anymore, because you already know the final score. Around second or third gear, you'll feel the flow. Use it for much, much more than making dough, because that would simply be the essence of a classy hoe. Discover what you don't know, you don't know. Remember, you can't get upstream no matter how hard you row. Integrity will always trump celebrity. Do what you say you'll do, and avoid the people and practice of throwing poo. Quietly stay the course of your will by being completely still. Cultivate the creative force of chill.
Maybe that should be the name of your book.
I've had that suggestion come up, and it's when you said that, I'm like, why did he say? Because roll your windows down and cruise. I've had a lot of people say that, like, I make things look easy, and it's like sometimes frustrating to go, man, it's not that easy. But that is part of my personality. Maybe it's the integral worldview of the clown. Like, hey, we're always having fun. This is joyful. And so I appreciate, you sent me that, and it made me think about it. And I'm like, well, that's why, that makes, to me, that made a lot of sense why that song reminds me of you, because I do want to roll my windows down and cruise. And I like the video, by the way. I love the video.
Well, it's funny because your poem also incorporates cars into it as well.
Yeah, in the car is the thing, so driving the car, that's a metaphor. So that's another message. Like, I really do like cars, but, in the poem, what I'm talking about is, when you discover who you are, if you think, so self-knowledge or knowing yourself, a lot of people think, know yourself means know your autobiography, right? Like, I won the math Super Bowl 1982 and 1983. I was the all-league pitcher in baseball and all this track record. And knowing yourself isn't your autobiography. That's actually kind of egotistical. Knowing yourself is kind of knowing how other people perceive you, or knowing, the archetypes. The archetypes is, I've been embodying these things my whole life, and it's only the last 5 or 6 years that I've become aware of it. And then once you're aware of something, then it's not necessarily working on you. You can actually use it. And again, I want to say it's not perfect execution, because a lot of these things, it's just interesting how humbling it is when I fall short, on a lot of this stuff.
Mark, you also talk about and think about, and you've said last year's money doesn't pay this year's rent. So what do you mean by that? Well,
so language is relatively new on the human scene, and I've written a lot about this, and you can get into it, but the theory is, humans basically created language so we could cooperate more to solve problems, like how we're going to get our food, or how we're going to cooperate with, as tribes, more and more people got together. there had to be ways, better ways of communicating, and I'm assuming I'm not a caveman, and I'm assuming that they're much more evolved than what we give them credit for. But a lot of communication is nonverbal, but language, I think now we're on overload. So last year's money, what I mean by that is 100,000 years ago and even 10,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago, this solved some great problems, right? How do we get along? How do we communicate? How do we share values between communities and compare ideas? And none of that is possible without language. And, now we, there's, if you think about the Stone Age, the agricultural age, the industrial age, now we're kind of in the post-industrial informational age. And, it's like the information war is over. Information won. That was just way too much information. And now it's like, how do you process it? So what I mean by last year's money doesn't pay this year's rent is I think now, we've inherited these networks of ideas that are so powerful. If you get something that's kind of screwed up in there, it can cause really big problems, so language. And I think it also leads to one of the biggest, pathologies, or I would call it the shadow side, which integral speech means we're not just talking about the great things about communication, we're talking about the limitations and the challenge. And I think one of the challenges of language is that it gives us this false sense of knowing, knowing what it's like to love somebody, or knowing what love is isn't the same thing as loving. Or knowing, how to make a contribution to your community or talking about it or writing it isn't the same thing as making a contribution. And so I think, I think that's the short version of that question. Did I answer?
Yeah, actually, go a little deeper on that, because you do talk about less talk, more walk.
Walkie, talkie. Yeah. One of my favorite sayings is it's not talkie, it's walkie. Is that what you mean? Or what did you mean?
Exactly right. Because that kind of relates to what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Don't just think about it or talk about it. You're saying do it.
Yeah. I mean, and so that's the fucking thing about it. So I'm thinking about. So I'm sitting here saying, less talkie, more walkie. But I'm sitting here recording a podcast, just doing most of the talking, right? But I'm actually, we are recording this. I'm actually a lot more careful with what I say. I'm going to say less because I know it's being recorded. And I have a joke with myself is I interviewed for the live podcast program, but I was rejected because too much of the stuff I say needs to be edited a lot of the time. So I only qualified for the recording, which that's a joke, but it is. I mean, I think one of the exercises that we did in my graduate studies was they wanted us to create a dialogue of a holistic cocktail party. That was one of the exercises. Like, what would the conversation be like? And so we were sharing ideas and everything. And I thought, man, wouldn't a holistic cocktail party be really awesome if it was just nothing but silence? Everybody laughed because it was funny. It was super true. It's like whenever that's the other tricky part about language is that it's metaphor, which is really powerful, but you can also make mistakes with that. It's that you create a duality where, like I said, pointing at the moon is not the same thing at the moon, I guess is another way to say it.
How does Dale Carnegie feed into the messenger?
So there's a couple, so we're kind of talking about what not to say. So I read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I was probably 18 or 20 years old. And then I had a mentor.
I love that book.
It's such a it's a great book. And I don't, the title, it is kind of a Don Juan thing, right? How do you win friends and influence people? And a few of his things, they just stuck with me, and I've never forgotten about it. But it's don't criticize, condemn, or complain. I think I wrote that down on a 3x5 card one time when I was like 25 or 26, or God forbid, gossip. So I have a good story about gossip. So the thing about gossip is it's not a moral issue, and really none of anything that I'm talking about is a moral. Like, well, this is what you should do. This is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. But if you gossip, it tells whoever you're gossiping to, they subliminally get that, like, you're talking about somebody else. You're talking smack about somebody else. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, if I'm not here, you're going to be talking smack about me. And so, again, I'm not perfect at this. And gossip, the thing is, I mean, the reason it's a sin is because it's awesome. You can get, it's intoxicating, right? Well, we could just sit here and talk about this guy, talk to this thing. The nice thing is, you don't have to admit anything true or, feedback or course correction for yourself. And I think it kind of also goes along with criticism or blame is the same thing. So the same boss that gave me that book, we also read Stephen Covey, and in part of, I forget, it's either being proactive or beginning with the end in mind. He shares the principle of non-duplicity. And I had a boss, and he was giving a speech at it was a forklift company. And in his speech, he was saying, we read our whole company's read the book, How to Win, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And everybody's trained, and we were proactive, which, to him meant we're going to get you before you get me, which is really not what proactive means. He goes, and we practice duplicity, and he went through and doing the whole thing. He goes, and we put first things first, and we think win-win, and we're, trust-based relationships are based on seeking to understand before you're understood, and synergize, and we sharpen the saw. He went through all that. So I talked to him after the speech, and I said, duplicity means you're two-faced. Because if you're at a meeting, it was kind of hard for me because I was young. I was like 26, 27 years old, and this guy's like owned his company, and he's kind of a super nice guy, but he was real, And so he told me, like, well, Stephen Covey, Yale graduate, psychologist, best-selling author. I go, he does say duplicity in the book, but what he's saying is duplicity is a bad thing. And so he actually, to my old boss credit, he went and he read that section and go, like, you're right. That word duplicity means something completely different than what I thought it did. So, duplicity is gossip. It's talking behind people's back. I mean, it's something that even in my family, people talk about other people, and I'll always say something like, somebody wants to talk, and I'm managing multiple people. So if somebody wants to blame something on someone else or go, well, it's all because, they'll say, hey, look, let's get them on a 3-way. Let's have a conversation. Like, let's protect, you always want to protect the reputation of the people who aren't there. And like I said, it's not the right thing to do. It's not because I'm saying it is, but it's just in the long-term relationships, people see it's like, wow, he wouldn't let me talk smack. He's protecting them. He's probably going to protect me. And they're not, it's subconscious. They're not even thinking that. But if you do that over and over and over, if you're gossiping all the time, man, I grew up in a town where it was a small town and everybody knew everything, as soon as you did it. And it's in a company or a culture, it can be like cancer, So,
I feel like this chapter really relates to a lot of things in culture, in the culture aspect of a company. The messenger.
And how you speak, because so the messenger, and then the next chapter is going to be action. And that's the first one where the archetype is kind of funny, because the archetype is the prostitute, which we're getting into. So, and just to clarify, so I based my archetype project on Carol Liniss's work, and she found in her studying that there were 4 archetypes that we all really have. It's the child, the prostitute, the saboteur, and the victim. And so everybody, everybody's been victimized at some point, like everybody. And then prostitute isn't really, but it's action. It goes with the action. And so it's through the lens of a prostitute. But prostitute is really, what you're willing to trade off. Prostitute is kind of a trade-off, like everything has a cost. And so, if you decide to, there's a lot of ways, but even, in business, whatever you decide to sell, you're trading your time for money, you're trading your expertise for money, but there's some kind of transaction, but it really has more to do with, and even so in the action one, the prostitute would be when you're choosing between two categories. Like I made a commitment and you could choose to keep that commitment, which I think is a great idea. Or you could choose not to keep that. And that's sort of through, but I'm jumping ahead to the next.
That's
chapter.
okay. They'll have to, listen to, there will be eventually another episode. So you can check that one out as far as what Mark was saying about the prostitute, right? Yeah. So he's just dropping a little friendly, to be continued. You'll have to check out the next episode. But there's two last things I want to talk about for this one, which is the messenger archetype is gratitude, and then your word. So talk about gratitude.
But there was one more thing about the Dale Carnegie, and it's because it's be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. And that was something that, people don't get enough kudos, right? Everybody's willing to let you know when you made a mistake. Here, you did this, you didn't do this. Here's some feedback, course correction. But and then what that also reminded me of is there's a thing about speech, and integral speech is choosing the words you use. And so one of my great experiences that I has it's probably been 10, maybe more years. We went on a cruise, and my kids were young and everything. A lot of the people were foreign. They spoke English, but broken English, but everything they said was excellent, fantastic. If you told them it was like excellent, sir, you asked them, so the words you choose, excellent, fantastic, amazing, dynamite. It makes a difference, and it changes. Like, wow, these guys don't speak very good English, but everything they say, they're using these words. So you have a choice of words. One of my favorite is the distinction between a problem, a challenge, and an opportunity. So instead of saying problem, so these are just substitutes, right? It's not even really a paradigm. It's like instead of this word, use this word. And the words I like to use for approbation is like, you deserve it, you've earned it, great performance. And then on the same wavelength, I like to use words like generate, create, invent the possibility. I mean, these are things that you can say, the word potential, like you have great potential, right? Or inventing the possibility is something I learned at a seminar that I was like a 5-day thing, but inventing a possibility. I mean, you're using language to really, create more opportunities. And so the gratitude is the other one that you wanted me to talk about, speaking gratitude. So I created, this is another one probably 5 years ago. Gratitude practice is kind of something that's I've seen a lot on there's lots of research on creating the gratitude practice. And so I have a few, when I meditate, there's sometimes when I'm grateful, but I started this practice of just writing things down. And I'm sad I can't give credit to whoever gave me this idea to just write down. I have a margin in my planner, and I'll write down things I'm grateful for. And it could be random stuff. It's little things, like I find the little things I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for having fresh water. I'm grateful for my pillows on my bed, my sheets, my computer, my books, I'll just read, it'll make it easy. And sometimes my kids have found this before, because don't always, but sometimes I'll write down, I'm thankful for Cody, Drake, Sarita, and then sometimes I write them in different order. And my daughter found it, and she'll go through it. She'll go, "Oh, you mentioned me first on this one." I go, "Well, look at more pages," because I always change the order because there is no favorite. But to me, and I think, and I've heard Andrew Huberman did a podcast on gratitude. After I created this practice, and I listened to the whole thing, and I didn't, because I think there's a key to this. The person I learned it from said, write all those things down, keep it simple, your card, a pencil. Like I'm grateful that I have a pencil, I have a book that I have, but also be thankful for the challenges, right? I'm thankful that my neighbor's such a jerk that I have to go over there and have a conversation with him because it's going to make me a better person. I'm thankful that I have this duty of giving, the stuff. And there's things in business I really don't do. I don't like doing the reports for the accountant, but I'm grateful that I'm grateful there's something to report. So I'm looking at, it's just kind of a way to shift the perspective, and in the never criticize, complain, or condemn thing from Dale Carnegie reminds me of my coach's coach who wrote this piece, and I copied this out of it. Was for the owner of Whole Foods. I had a quote, and the quote was, every time I had a breakthrough, I don't even know his name, I just know he owned Whole Foods, but every time I had a breakthrough, Whole Foods had a breakthrough. And every time I was ready to have my next breakthrough, Whole Foods would show me because of what I was complaining about in Whole Foods. And I think that is just, it's a beautiful way of taking your complaints. I mean, it was the genesis of when I started thinking about starting my own company, because I've never been a complainer. I'm not going to be part of the problem. I'm going to be part of the solution. And that's not just a cliche. I really, I found myself complaining. Oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm in the meetings and everything. It's like, wait a minute, don't complain. Use it to create a transformation.
Yeah. I love that. And when you say that, Mark, it's like, it makes me think I take so many things for granted, right? I mean, when you talk about the gratitude stuff, well, I'm grateful for this water, right? And
Yeah.
I'm grateful for whatever, that there's a lot of people in the world who don't have that, right? Let's take us home on your word and how that relates to the messenger.
Okay, so of all of these things, in the poem it says, once you discover who you are, you're going to drive that fancy car. And, discovering who you are is a lifelong process. And what I want to say about that first is, when I started to say the thing about thyself doesn't mean know your track record. What it does mean is you can BS yourself. It's really easy. Everybody does it. I mean, then no one's better at it than I am. And really knowing yourself is the continuous, never-ending process of discovering the ways that you bullshit yourself and correcting it, bringing it to light. I mean, enlightenment is like bringing those things that were shadow aspects. That's why I love the archetypes, because, what am I doing as a messenger that the shadow, and how do I integrate that shadow? And it's fine. I have to make a public apology to Jeff Taylor. I messed up his name on another podcast that we did. I was like, it's Jeff Watson or Jeff Walker. And then the team that was reading it, they said, oh, the guy you were talking about, his name was Jeff Taylor. Well, I went to his LinkedIn, because we did find his LinkedIn profile. He's, out of Monster for years, and he works for another company. But I sent a message to add him to my LinkedIn. I told him, hey, I mentioned you on a podcast, I messed up your name. And, so the other thing is, you're going to make mistakes, okay, about being your word. Like, I've kept my word that every single time I say something on podcast, it's going to be the right thing. So on that case, I kind of messed up my word because I messed up his name. So I did something about it. So the thing about you are your word is, I think is really, it's of all this of the messenger, this is really, um, this is the bottom line. I mean, you give your word yourself, you give, and it's something you don't find in a lot of people give their word and then they do a cost benefit analysis when it comes time to keep their word. Uh, and what really makes the word, and again, this isn't right or wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong or that's wrong, but when you continue, and I just mean little things, and I try to get my team to do this all the time. If you just make little commitments and then keep that commitment, you could start building on bigger commitments. People start to try. It's like, he said he was going to call in 15 minutes. He called in 15 minutes. He said he was going to give an update, give an update. He said he was going to send a resource to the thing. He gave a resource to the thing. So the key to it, and again, it's being cautious about making commitments and then super dedicated to keeping them, and then correcting course when you can. Because the thing is if you're doing anything of significance and there's stuff on your time, I mean, there's gonna be times where you give your word and you just can't make it work, you know? And so it isn't about being perfect with your word, but it is about honoring it. And if something does come up, you don't just say, oh, we're not, I'm not going to do that because something better came up. You actually have to say, okay, I gave you my word. That's not going to happen. How did that affect you? And sometimes there are people like, hey, if we can reschedule, or someone's like, well, now I have a deadline. I'm not going to, be able to do it. And so it's figuring out a way to make your word work in a way where people know, hey, if I give something, and then it just builds trust. And it leads into the next chapter, which is the action chapter, is that, your word really creates the container for the action you're going to take, because you say you're going to do something and then do it. And then the action is doing it. So to me, that's really important. And there was one more thing that I left out about the messenger. And it's did I say anything about self-talk, how you talk to yourself? Yeah, because that's the other thing. You're the messenger, you're constantly in a dialogue with yourself, right? You can call it the critic, your conscience. And one of the great things about meditation, a certain meditation, like when you just settle down, you just kind of witness how you're talking to yourself. It's like, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. Why are you meditating? You don't know how to meditate. You should be shopping. You should be grocery. Has meditating done anything for you? What are they? And that sets in after like 2 minutes. And so you let that settle and you just kind of acknowledge it. But then, and you really slow down and you really still, you see how the language, what that internal dialogue is. And I think it's important. All the things we talked about: don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Be lavish in in your approbation, lavish in your praise. All those things are important just as much as talking with other people is your own self-talk. And the last thing is a story. One of my greatest mentors was just this awesome electrician, and he was like a tough guy. He wasn't like, this isn't the guy I thought who's going to be, like Stuart Smalley on Saturday Night Live reading the doggone.
I'm good enough. I'm strong enough, and God darn it, people like me, or something like that.
So this guy is not that kind of guy. He's an electrician. He's like, tough guy. And he told me, he said, man, when I first started, and I mean, he was doing conveyor system, he was doing nuclear power plants, water treatments. This guy's a guy that everybody, looked to. And one of my favorite things about, he told a guy one time they were working, and he goes, look, man, I don't have time to explain the theory. Just do it the way I told you to. Okay. But he said for the first 6 months, every time he'd go to work, before he went to work, he'd say, because he was threatened by this new trade of being an electrician, because it was a lot. He was telling himself, I'm a good electrician. I'm an electrician. I'm an awesome electrician. And I was blown away, because I was like, man, that's like some super, affirmation is a really powerful way to speak to yourself. And, I just thought, man, everybody could use a little bit of positive self-affirmation. So that
What
that's
makes me think of this, Mark, about one last thought about your word is The Four Agreements is one of my favorite books. And it's very simple. It's very simple. And be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumption. Always do your best. And you talked about it, which is it doesn't mean you always are 100% on, right? You just,
right.
It's also about always do your best. Like sometimes your best is different if you got 3 hours of sleep that night, you haven't eaten anything, you haven't drank anything, whatever, your best may change. And so I love that book, and it kind of encapsulates what you were talking about, which is one piece of that, which is be impeccable with your word. And if you can't do it, at least you can, let the person know why, and just try and live up to as much as you can, even if you cannot, actually live up to your promise, you follow up with it. So there's still that trust there. So I want to encourage people, Mark, to check out other episodes of your podcast. And I'm looking forward to also hearing and listening to, if you want to check out the next one, which, there may be other interviews in between it, but the integral action of the prostitute, that will be an interesting one. So I'm looking forward to that one too. So Mark, thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been a delight. I appreciate it. Have a good one, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.